This is Joe with Cloud First Labs, back here for part 2 of this 2-part video series on invoking a MuleSoft RPA process via HTTP and Postman. In part 1, we set up the credentials that we will need for using OAuth to authenticate and authorize for calling this API, and we also generated the API URL for this RPA process and copied that value out of Exchange. So on my other screen that's not showing here, I've got the credentials and the URL that we grabbed in part 1. And now I'm here in Postman. Let's go ahead and build this request. We're going to start with a put request because this is how we create a new RPA process execution. So again, this URL is what we grabbed out of Exchange in part 1. And now we're going to go to the authorization tab, and for type, we're going to use OAuth 2.0. And you see we don't have a token yet. I'm going to come down here and configure a new token. We're going to use client credentials, and then I'm going to grab the client ID that we got out of access management in part 1, and also the client secret. I've pasted those in here. And then for access token URL, I'm going to paste in this value. It's standard for getting MuleSoft OAuth 2 tokens. It's https anypoint.mulesoft.com accounts API v2 OAuth 2 token. So we plug in those values and then scroll down. I'm going to click Get New Access Token. Okay, cool, that got it. And I'm going to say Use Token. So now it applies it. We've got a bearer prefix here. And so now this request is going to use this token to authenticate and authorize to this API. But before we can send it, we need to send some data. We need to create a payload. I've got one copied over here, but we'll go through these parts. Some unique ID 123 for my execution ID. You need to use a unique execution ID here. And then these input arguments, these are specific to my use case, my widget RPA process. Yours will look different depending on what activity parameters your RPA process uses. If you don't pass in input arguments, it will fall back to the default activity parameter values that are configured on your invocable run configuration in RPA Manager, which we set up in part 1. But here I'm going to override mine with these. And so now I can go ahead and I can hit send, and boom, 201 created. That tells me it kicked off the process. And now I'm going to grab this ID. I'm going to stick it on the end here. And now I'm going to change this from a put to a get. And instead of sending a body, there's no need to send a body. Now I'm going to specifically be looking up data. I'm going to be looking up the status and details of this RPA process execution tied to some unique ID 123. So we see here it's in not started state. It might take a little while before it's running, but this get API, with the process ID tacked on to the end, the process execution ID tacked on to the end, this is how we find out the status and the details of the RPA process execution. So we're going to try this again. Hey, now it's in running status. So this should run for a minute or so, maybe a little less. And all right, I run it again, and the RPA process has completed. And now we're going to see, hey, we've got results down here. And these results that we find here are values from the activity parameters of the running RPA process. And you see they got updated over the course of the run. And so this is the output. So if some process cares about some of the output, it can grab these values from this follow-up get API request, and it can, parse this data and use the values as needed. So these are the steps to follow between part 1 and part 2 of this video series for getting your RPA process promoted into production phase, getting credentials and getting an API URL, calling that URL, triggering it, and then getting the status and the details of that running RPA process execution. This is how you do it using Postman. So thank you for following along, and good luck on your MuleSoft RPA journey.